There's a lot more fun and human interest in history and art than you've been led to believe. I'm Professor Andrew Lear, classicist and expert on sexuality in ancient Greek art. I've developed a hugely popular series of art museum tours uncovering the sexy secrets of history and art. This series will follow up on that, spreading the fun to all the art lovers out on the internet. Today's episode is about sexy stories from the Bible. What did I say? Sexy stories from the Bible. And the bathing beauties they inspired in Western art from the Renaissance through the 19th century. In the last episode, we talked about classical mythology as an excuse that artists used to make sexy pictures. Well, paradoxically, the other main excuse they used was Christianity. Now, as we all know, Christianity is not a very sexy religion. Just compare the birth of Christ to a classical myth. In a classical myth, a god would rape a young woman, and then she'd have a son, and then there'd be some long, complicated story about the son, probably involving romance and or marriage, as in Perseus and Andromeda. In Christianity, God has a son, but via a virgin birth, and the son, Christ, has no apparent sexual relations or wife, so it's a pretty sexless religion. And there aren't even many sexy stories in the whole Bible. And also, the few there are extremely minor. But that is the point of today's episode. Artists had a great way of getting around that problem, and that was that they simply painted the few minor sexy stories repeatedly. The main one of these is Susanna and the Elders. This story is so unimportant that neither Jews nor Protestants even consider it authentically biblical. But Susanna and the Elders is in every art museum. Indeed, most museums have several Susannas. The story is simple and highly moral. Susanna goes into her garden, apparently where you bathe in the Bible, to bathe, not knowing that two elders, which means a judge of some kind, but implies the age that was supposed to bring wisdom, were hiding there in order to stalk her. When she gets undressed, they jump out and proposition her. Since she says no, they threaten her. If she doesn't give in to them, they will say that they caught her having sex with a young man in her garden. Still, Susanna, who sees clearly that she's screwed, as it were, in either way, refuses. So the elders make their false accusation, but the prophet Daniel warns the people not to stone her, which is of course what you would do, until they've checked into the accusation. He questions the two men separately, and their stories conflict, so Susanna is saved, and the elders are put to death. Now there is plenty to this story other than the bathing scene, but who cares about all of that? What artists cared about was Susanna in the bath, where she was naked or nakedish, young and beautiful. In other words, a perfect pinup. In fact, even if you focus only on that one scene, you don't have to make it sexy. One version, by the rare woman Renaissance painter Artemisia Gentileschi, portrays Susanna as anguished, and the scene comes off as non-erotic. But most painters, by contrast, were trying to make it sexy. And the way they do this is to go beyond the biblical text and present the scene as a sexual assault. This allows them to include more nudity and more references to sex in the scene. This painting by Allori is an example. Pinned between the two elders, Susanna has twisted to the side, revealing both her breasts and her buttocks, which is quite a trick, while the elder on the right is pushing one hand between her thighs, referring much more directly to sex than was usually possible in the Western tradition. A little less common in art is the other bathing lady of the Bible, Bathsheba. This story is more important and also securely biblical. King David sees Bathsheba bathing and falls in love with her, or whatever you call it, when you see a naked woman and want to sleep with her. This is a problem because Bathsheba is married, but David solves the problem by having her husband, Uriah the Hittite, sent to the front line in battle where he is promptly killed. Then he marries Bathsheba, but God, as interpreted by the prophet Samuel, is angry, and their first child dies. Then David repents, and Bathsheba bears another son, Solomon. As with the Susanna story, the whole story of David's repentance, etc., is not of any interest to artists, because there's nothing sexy in it. What's of interest to artists is Bathsheba at her bath, the naked, sexy lady. Her bathing scene is less complicated than Susanna's. In today's porn terms, this is just a shower scene with no sexual activity. Here we have an example by the painter Chiari. Bathsheba is bathing, which, as so often in art, seems to mean taking a sponge bath, perhaps because immersive bathing does not provide good views to the audience. She's also doing a lot of the things that make women sexy in art. One of them is that she's semi-concealing her nudity. She has thrown one of her arms casually up, covering 1.5 of her breasts, leaving just half a breast on view. But in case you like breasts, don't worry, because her servant in the lower right-hand corner is having something that doesn't occur very often in real life, but occurs very frequently in art: a nip slip. So you get to see a breast down there, and in total you have 1.5 breasts, so there's something for the breast lover in the painting. Bathsheba is doing a bunch of other sexy things. First of all, she's naked and looking at herself in the mirror. And we know this kind of self-directed voyeurism is somehow very connected with sexual desire for human beings. I think of the mirrors over the beds in Caesar's palace that I saw once when I was in Las Vegas, but also sexting and nude selfies and so on and so forth. Her looking in the mirror is part of that theme. And she's also making a little kicky gesture with her foot, a kind of coy fiddle-dee-dee gesture that we see sexy women make a lot in art. Also, in front of the basin in which she's bathing, there's a pitcher tipped over on the ground that presumably was used to pour water into her bath. These tipped-over vessels are typical of scenes of sexiness and drunkenness. They seem to imply that the subject is letting it all go, has given in to sensuality or something like that. We also see David in the scene, up on the roof of his palace, to the upper right in the painting. There seems to be something wrong with this figure. Perhaps it's unfinished and consists largely of underpaint, or maybe it's faded. He is, however, gazing out at Bathsheba and lusting after her. And one of his significances, aside from his role in the story, is that this gives the viewer permission to lust after her as well. The last of the popular sexy stories is Judith and Holofernes. Like Susanna and the Elders, this is a very unimportant story, and possibly non-biblical. As with Susanna, there is both sex and violence here, though the shoe is on the other foot, since the violence is committed by Judith. Judith was a Jewish woman who went to the tent of the enemy general Holofernes and seduced him. And then, when he was falling asleep, she cut off his head. This is very popular with painters, probably because we all like a little danger mixed in with our sexiness. The sexy, dangerous woman is a popular fantasy. This version of the scene, by the Flemish painter Jan Massis, is particularly sexy. An effect Massis achieves by showing you two different phases of the story simultaneously. Judith already has the severed head in her hand, but at the same time, she is being seductive, as she presumably was with Holofernes in the earlier phases of the story. She looks out of the painting coyly. Her upper body is nude, and her skirts are slipping down over her thighs and forming a highly suggestive V just above her genitalia. So there we have it, a sexless religion that somehow became a fount of sexy stories for artists. In the next episode, we'll explore the other way in which artists used Christianity as an excuse for sexy pictures, by sexualizing and generally homoeroticizing any nude male they could get their hands on, including several sexy saints, and even, oh blasphemy, sexy Jesus himself. Here are the paintings which were part of today's episode.